All right, so we're diving into something today that's pretty core for, sales and revenue leaders out there.
Absolutely.
You're always looking for ways to be more efficient, hit those targets.
Sure.
And we're talking about deal qualification.
Yeah.
And I've got Nova here with me.
Yeah.
And we're gonna really try to give you some actionable stuff today to
Absolutely.
make sure that your teams are focused on the right deals.
Yeah, that's right.
So let's just get right into it.
Okay, let's do it.
Deal qualification, like what is that really all about?
Well, for me, it's all about making sure that you're making the most of every sales interaction, right? And especially today because the B2B environment is so complex.
Yeah.
Sales cycles are longer, there are more people involved.
Yeah.
And I always say, if you don't have a strong qualification process, it's kind of like you're trying to fill a bucket with a hole in it.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, so let's break it down for the people listening.
Yeah.
What is deal qualification, at its most basic level?
So essentially, it's about deciding which opportunities are actually worth pursuing,
Okay,
right? It's about deciding where to invest your time and your resources.
makes sense. Now, for sales leaders, why is it so important to get good at this?
I mean, there are so many benefits if you get this right.
Oh,
You're going to be able to prioritize the high potential deals right off the bat.
right.
You're going to free up your team's time so they don't waste energy on leads that are unlikely to close.
Yeah,
You can create more accurate sales forecasts, which I think we all know how valuable that is.
for sure.
And then you can allocate your resources, your budget, your people in a much smarter way.
Right. So you're basically saying it's about getting more out of every dollar and every minute.
Exactly. It's about maximizing the impact of your team's efforts.
Now, is this all just common sense, or are there actual numbers to back up, the impact of good deal qualification?
Oh, the data's there.
Okay.
A lot of studies actually show that 67% of lost sales
Yeah,
can be directly attributed to poor qualification.
that's huge.
Yeah, it is a big number, and it means that there's a lot of potential revenue being left on the table.
Right.
When you qualify effectively, though, you naturally start to see a lot of positive changes.
Okay.
Sales cycles get shorter, your win rates go up,
Makes sense?
your team is closing more deals, which means they're more productive and more motivated,
Right.
and you have a much clearer picture of what your future pipeline looks like.
Okay, so we know why it matters now.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about those green flags. Like, what are some signs that you're looking at a truly qualified deal?
So there are a few key things to look for.
Okay.
The first is real alignment.
Okay.
It's not enough for a prospect to be just kind of interested.
Right.
There needs to be a clear match between their needs and challenges
Okay.
and what your solution actually does.
Got it.
Second, and this one's really important, you need to make sure they actually have the budget,
Makes sense.
to buy what you're selling.
Right. Yeah.
And then third, you want to make sure that you've made contact and you've started to build relationships
Right.
with the key decision makers and stakeholders in the deal.
Yeah. And especially in the enterprise world, that could be a lot of people, right?
Oh, yeah. Especially in enterprise sales, you could easily be dealing with 6 to 10 people
Yeah.
who are involved in the decision.
Wow.
And then finally, a qualified deal usually has a timeline.
Okay.
There's usually a deadline or a specific business goal
Right.
that's driving the need for a decision.
Okay. So alignment, budget, stakeholders, and a timeline.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
Now, for people who are listening, and they're trying to implement some of these ideas, like, are there any, kind of established approaches or frameworks that people use for this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
There are a few popular frameworks that can really help.
Okay. Like what?
So you've got BANT, SPIN, and MEDDIC,
Okay.
and each one kind of has its own strengths and weaknesses.
Okay. Why don't you break those down for us a little bit?
Sure. So let's start with BANT.
Okay.
Budget, authority, need, and timeline.
Got it.
It's a classic for a reason. It's simple, it's clear.
Right.
Basically, it helps you quickly figure out, does this prospect have the money?
Right.
Do we know who makes the decisions?
Right.
Do they have a need that our product solves?
Makes sense.
And is there a timeline in place?
Okay. So for someone who's maybe dealing with a lot of sales,
Mm-hmm.
a high volume of sales, maybe more transactional type sales,
Right.
what's the advantage of BANT?
BANT is great for quick filtering.
Okay.
It helps you kind of quickly assess those basic criteria.
Right.
However, it can be a little bit limited,
Okay.
especially when you're dealing with larger, more complex deals
Yeah.
where, the decision-making process is not always so straightforward.
Right. You might get yeses to all four of those things, but still not really have a good deal.
Exactly. You could check all the BANT boxes.
Yeah.
but still not fully understand the nuances of the situation.
Right. Or the pain points.
Exactly. Or if there's true buy-in.
Okay, so if you are using BANT, are there ways to kind of make it more robust?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you never want to just take those answers at face value,
Right.
right? You want to dig deeper.
Okay.
So, for example, when you're talking about need, don't just ask if they need it.
Okay.
Ask about the cost of inaction,
I like that.
right? Like, what happens if they don't solve this problem?
Right.
When you're talking about authority, don't just ask who the decision maker is.
Okay.
Ask about their typical approval process
Okay.
for deals like this one.
Right.
And then always ask a gut check question.
Okay.
Something like, if our solution fixes your problem and it fits your budget,
Okay.
is there anything else that would prevent you from moving forward?
Right.
Just to get a sense of, are there any other roadblocks that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, I like that. Okay, what about like spin?
All right, so a spin is situation, problem, implication, need, payoff.
Okay.
And it's a very customer-centric approach.
Okay.
It's really about understanding their challenges in depth.
Got it.
So you start by, learning about their current situation.
Yeah.
Then you pinpoint the problems that they're facing.
Okay.
You explore the implications if those problems aren't addressed.
Right.
And then finally, you help them see the value, the need payoff of your solution.
Right. Now, for folks who are in sales roles that are more consultative,
Right.
what's the big advantage of spin?
Spin is all about building rapport and understanding those pain points,
Okay.
which is essential in those more complex, higher value sales.
Right.
However, it does require more time and skill from your team.
Okay.
So it might not be the best fit for those really quick transactional deals.
Right, where you need to move fast.
Exactly.
Got it. Now, are there any best practices that come to mind when you're coaching your teams on spin?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I mean, the implication questions are key.
Okay.
That's where you really start to create a sense of urgency.
Okay.
So, for example, you could ask something like,
Okay.
if this issue isn't resolved this quarter, what kind of impact is it going to have on your team's productivity? And you always want to tie the problem back to important business outcomes like revenue or their strategic goals or compliance.
Right.
Try to uncover any hidden concerns.
How do you do that?
You could ask, what were some of the unexpected roadblocks that you faced
Okay.
in similar projects in the past?
Right.
And remember that it's not just about qualifying the deal. You also need to qualify the person.
Right.
So ask questions like, who else will be impacted by this decision
Okay.
and what are their priorities?
Okay. And so ultimately you're trying to figure out if they're in a position to actually move forward.
Yeah, a really powerful question can be, if we could fast track a solution that solves this problem effectively,
Okay.
would you be able to move forward in the near term?
Got it. Okay. Now, what about MEDDIC?
So MEDDIC stands for Metrics, Economic Buyer Decision Criteria, Decision Process, Identify Pain, and Champion.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, it's a comprehensive one.
Okay.
But it's a really powerful framework when you're dealing with those really complex B2B deals. It really forces you to think through every aspect of the sale.
Right.
You need to define the measurable impact
Right.
of your solution. So those are your metrics.
Okay.
You need to identify the person who actually has the authority to sign off on the deal.
That's the economic buyer.
Exactly.
Okay.
You need to understand how they're going to make their decision. What are their criteria?
Right.
You need to map out their entire decision-making process.
Okay.
You need to really dig into their pain points and make sure you understand them deeply.
Right.
And then finally, you need to find a champion within their organization.
Okay. So someone who's going to advocate for you.
Exactly. Someone who's on your side.
Okay. So for folks that are listening, sales leaders that are dealing with these big high-stakes enterprise deals,
Yeah.
what are the big advantages of MEDDIC?
I mean, the biggest one is probably forecasting accuracy.
Okay.
When you really understand the decision process and you have a champion on the inside,
Right.
your chances of winning go way up, and you can much more accurately predict when that's going to happen.
Right. So you're kind of reducing the risk as well.
Yeah, exactly. You're taking a lot of the guesswork out of it.
Okay.
But on the flip side, it is a very detailed framework.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And it might be a bit too much
Right.
for smaller teams or for simpler sales.
Right.
It requires, a real commitment to collecting and tracking all of this information.
Makes sense. Now, if you're a sales leader and you're implementing MEDDIC with your team, any must-dos come to mind?
Oh, yeah, a few things.
Okay.
First, make sure those metrics are measurable and that they're tied to real business outcomes.
Okay.
If a prospect can't explain how your solution is going to improve specific KPIs,
Right.
that's a red flag.
Okay.
Second, don't just rely on job titles
Okay.
to identify the economic buyer.
Right. Someone could have a fancy title, but not actually be the decision maker.
Exactly. So ask questions like, what's the budget for this type of initiative?
Okay.
Have you personally approved similar investments in the past? You could even ask, what percentage of deals like this one typically require your final sign-off?
Okay.
Some people call this the 95% rule.
Okay. Like that.
And then most importantly, make sure you connect your solution
Right.
to the leadership team's top priorities.
Right.
Ask things like, what are the key initiatives that your executive team is focused on right now?
Makes sense. Okay, so we've got these frameworks. They sound great, but like, are there actual tools that teens can use to actually, put this stuff into practice and do it more effectively?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
The technology is a game changer here.
Okay.
For starters, your CRM system,
Okay.
Something like Salesforce or HubSpot,
Right.
that's your central hub for all your deal information.
Okay.
And you can customize it to track the specific things that you're looking for.
Right.
Whether you're using BANT or MEDDIC,
Right.
you can create custom fields, checklists, you can even build automated workflows.
Wow. Okay, so the CRM is really the foundation.
It really is.
Okay, cool.
What else? Lead scoring tools
Okay.
like ZoomInfo or Marketo.
Right.
These can help you automatically rank your prospects
Okay.
based on things like their demographics, their behavior, their engagement.
So how does that work?
Well, you can set it up so that it aligns with your qualification criteria.
Okay, give me an example.
Sure. So you could give a higher score to leads from companies that match your ideal revenue profile.
So that's budget.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or leads who hold decision-making roles, so that's authority.
Right.
Or you could bump up the score for someone who downloads a case study related to their pain point.
So that's need.
Yeah. And if someone's really active on your website,
Okay.
you can increase their score because that indicates, a potential sense of urgency.
So that's timeline.
Exactly.
Okay, so this basically helps you figure out who to focus on first.
Right. It helps you prioritize your efforts.
Okay, what about the last category of tools?
All right. So these are the revenue intelligence platforms
Yeah.
like Gong or Meet Record.
Right, I've heard of those.
They're awesome. These tools use AI to analyze things like your sales calls and your emails.
Okay.
And they give you all these valuable insights into how healthy a deal actually is.
Okay, so like what kind of insights?
Well, they can pick up on buying signals.
Okay.
They can track if those key qualification criteria are being discussed, like
Right.
budget and authority.
Right.
And they can even provide real-time feedback
Wow.
to your reps during a call.
Okay.
And for you as a leader, you get to see if your team is actually asking the right questions.
That's powerful. Now, beyond the frameworks and the tools, for the people listening, any advice on kind of overarching best practices for improving deal qualification?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I mean, first of all, you need to go beyond just buying intent,
Okay.
right? Like everyone's tracking that these days, but you also need to track energy and intent.
What do you mean by that?
So, I mean, you want to look at things like responsiveness.
Okay.
How quickly are they getting back to you?
Right.
How engaged are the stakeholders? Are they actively participating in meetings?
Right.
And then how much urgency are they showing?
Right, because a deal could look good on paper,
Right.
but if no one seems that excited about it, maybe it's not a real deal.
Exactly. It's all about momentum.
Okay, what else?
Make sure you're regularly analyzing those closed lost deals.
Okay.
Figure out why you're losing.
Yeah.
And look for patterns.
Right.
Create a list of what I call no-go criteria based on what you learn.
Okay, give me an example.
So let's say you see a lot of deals stalling out.
Right.
Because of legal issues or because there's no buy-in from the executive team.
Okay.
Well, those should become clear indicators
Right.
that maybe you need to disqualify similar deals earlier in the process.
Right, so you're basically learning from your mistakes.
Exactly. You want to turn those losses into valuable insights.
Love it. Okay, next.
Embrace automation
Okay.
wherever you can.
Okay.
Use AI-powered lead scoring
Right.
to automatically surface those hot prospects
Right.
and set up those automated workflows in your CRM
Okay.
so you can guide leads through the qualification stages.
Makes sense, and we talked about some of those tools earlier, right?
Yeah, exactly. Tools like Marketo and ZoomInfo can do a lot of this for you.
Cool. And you also mentioned those revenue intelligence platforms. What role can they play in all of this?
Oh, they're so useful.
Okay.
use them to get that objective feedback on your sales conversations.
Right.
Are they actually asking the right questions? Are
Okay.
they following the process?
Okay.
You can also use them to spot those warning signs early on.
Okay.
And you can even use that data to coach your reps,
Right.
and help them improve their skills.
Got it. Okay, one last best practice for the folks listening.
All right, so make deal qualification an ongoing process.
Okay.
Right? It's not something you just set and forget.
Right, you have to constantly evaluate.
Exactly. You want to analyze those conversion rates.
Okay.
At each stage of your pipeline, you want to see how long it takes to close different types of deals. Look for those patterns in the deals that are disqualified early on.
Right.
And then create a feedback loop with your team.
How do you do that?
I mean, you could create a dedicated Slack channel or a Teams channel where people can talk about, difficult deals or share insights.
Okay.
And then use your regular sales meetings to
Yes.
go over the qualification questions,
Right.
see what's working, what's not working, and then refine them as you go.
Right. So basically, make it a living, breathing thing.
Exactly. I just keep it dynamic.
Love it. So for all the sales and revenue leaders listening out there, I think the big takeaway is that having a structured and consistent approach to deal qualification is absolutely critical.
Yes.
If you want to maximize your team's effectiveness and hit those revenue goals,
For sure.
Understand those frameworks,
Yes.
leverage those tools,
Absolutely.
and keep refining the process based on, the real world feedback that you're getting. What are some things that people can do like today, after listening to this?
Well, I mean, you could start by just evaluating your current qualification process.
Okay.
How well defined is it? Is your team actually using it consistently?
Right.
Then you could dive into those frameworks we talked about.
Right. BANT, SPIN, MEDDIC.
Exactly. And figure out which one aligns best
Okay.
with your specific sales motion.
Right.
And then, really start to investigate the potential of using those CRM lead scoring and revenue intelligence tools.
That's great advice. So Nova, thanks so much for joining me on the deep dive today. This was great.
Thanks for having me.
And for everyone listening, beyond those frameworks and the tools, I want you to think about this.
Okay.
How can you use a deeper understanding of your ideal customer profile and their needs
Right.
to further sharpen your deal qualification and drive sustainable growth?
It's a great question.
It's something to really discuss with your teams and, see what you can come up with. Thanks again for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time.